All right, hello there everyone. This is John from Nickthen Gaming. Today I am going to walk you through how to build a FERN website and host it onto Heroku. We're not going to be doing any styles, and this video assumes that you already have your npm installed, git bash installed, and pretty much everything else installed. Just follow along. If you see any errors that say you don't have the stuff installed, then I recommend Googling it. Let me know in the comments and we can work on how to get that installed for you. But this is assuming that you have things installed on your device already. So without further ado, let's get started on creating this. So I've got an empty folder here that's open in Visual Studio Code. For best results, I do recommend following along in Visual Studio Code, because I will be using shortcuts and all of that. And just to let you know, we're going to be using HTML, CSS, React, and Node. If you don't know, FERN stands for Firebase, EJS, React, and Node. So I'm going to press Control and backtick, which is the button to the left of the 1 on the keyboard. To open the terminal, I'm going to open my git bash. This is the first thing that you would really want to install. Yes, you'll also need the Heroku command line interface and Firebase project. All of this can be done completely free. They do have paid versions if you want to upgrade, but let's get started. So in my FERN demo, I want to say touch server.js. This just creates a server.js file. I also want to say mkdir, and I want to name this routes. Mkdir means make directory or make a new folder. Now I'm going to say touch routes / index.js. This will create an index.js file in my routes folder. Next, I want to say npm init. I want to do npm init-y, so I don't have to type in any of this stuff. I'll type it in later. And that will initialize npm with the package JSON, which you see here. We have the main as our server.js, which is good. You can add your author name and some descriptions if you want, and it should grab the name of our main folder as well. So let's go and work on some of our dependencies. So to add dependencies, I'm going to type npm I, and then I want to type in all of the dependencies that we have. So let's work on adding things. I'm going to add cores. I'm going to add create React app. I'm going to add .env. I'm going to add express firebase-admin and nodemon, and then I'm going to press enter. Now, as this is installing, let's talk about them. Cores is the node security policy that we pretty much need. Create React app will let us create our React app later. .env will allow us to access the environment variables from Heroku. Express will let us create a Node Express server. Firebase admin lets us get data from our Firebase Firestore database, and nodemon lets us run our node server. Now let's go into the scripts, and I want to just delete all of this because instead I want to type start : and this will be node server.js. Next I want to type dev : concurrently backtick quotation mark nodemon server.js backtick quotation mark backtick quotation mark cd client and npm run start backslash quotation mark. Let's add a comma at the end of that. And finally, let's type Heroku dash post build, all one word, colon, cd, client, and npm run build. Now, start means at the start of our script, we run node on our server.js. That starts our node server. The dev is for our development. It will concurrently at the same time run nodemon on our server.js, move into our client folder, which we'll add with create React app later, and run npm run start. And then Heroku post build will do start, and then Heroku post build. It will cd into the client. We'll talk about cd later, and run npm run build. Okay, so that's what we need there. And we don't need anything else here, so I'll save it at this time, add the description and the author if you want. But let's go into our server.js now. Now, in the server.js, we want to initialize our node server. So we'll say require.env.config. We'll say const express equals require express. We'll say const cores equals require cores. We'll say const router equals require dot slash routes slash index. I'll talk about these in a moment. Const path equals require path. Const port equals process.env.port capitalized or 3001. So what this is, require.env pretty much configures our .env so we can do things like process.env. This is something required by Heroku and very useful. Const express starts our express server. Cores starts our cores, which is our protection policy. Our router links to these route index, which is something that Heroku needs for you to get, post, patch, update, delete, whatnot from your React app to your node server. The path, we actually don't need to import it, just like we won't need to import HTTP later, because that's a default with Node. And you'll see us using the path later to kind of resolve paths. And then the port is what internet port this server is going to be ran on. I use 3001 because I'm going to put the React on 3000. Feel free to use any available port that you have. Google it to learn more about it, or ask me and I can make a video on that, but I don't believe it's too important. Next, let's do const app equals express. Oh my. Express, there we go. This initializes our app, our express app. Then I say app.use. It's going to use our express. No, I'm sorry. It's going to use cores. There we go. The next one is using express. So app.use express.url encoded, and I like to say extended is true. This will let us use JSON in our bodies and stuff like that instead of using something like body parser. So another app.use express.json, and I like to put a limit inside of this. So I will say limit, and I'm going to set my limit to 50 megabytes just because sometimes we have too much data and it throws an error there, crashing things. And then I'm going to say app.use/API, and then router. You'll see more about the /API later when we get into our client. But for now, this is the path that we have to go to get to our router. You can change this to whatever you want. You can name it Timothy if you want. Next is a thing that we need for Heroku again. So we say if process.env.node_env, node env is all capitalized, like we're yelling, equals production. Then we say app.use express.static client/build app.get star or asterisk res equals greater than function res.send file, and here's where we use our path dot resolve __ dear name comma client comma build comma index.html. You'll see the index.html after we build our React app. The star gets everything that we get, and we just send the file from the index.html. This lets us do our routing in the React app. And then this tells us that we're using the client/build folder. When you create React app, if you do a different name other than client for your React app folder name, you do need to change it here. And we'll talk about that later, hopefully. Now, next after that, const http equals require http. Just like path, we don't need to import http or install http because it comes default. Next, I want to say const server equals http dot create server. Just like it sounds, it's creating a server on our app that we can use. Next, we say server dot listen to our port. When that's done, I'm going to run a function that will say console.log backtick server listening on port $ curly brackets port capitalized period to make it grammatically acceptable. And with that, our server is done. Here it is one last time. Let me move the mouse. You can pause it here if you want to keep typing. Okay, now let's go into our routes index. The routes index is where we are going to do all of our git, post, patch, update, whatnot, when we want to receive or send something to our node server from our React server. So I'm going to say const express equals require express. I'm not going to make mine pretty or full just because you should be able to take the things that I give you and make something nice out of that. So const router equals express.router. Now we want to, let's actually do hashtag region or # region, # in region, and this is going to be initialize Firebase. I like to use regions. It's pretty contested topic. Some people love it, some people hate it, some people like me just find them useful every now and then. Now, const curly brackets initialize app and cert equals require Firebase admin /app. Next, I want to do const get Firestore. If you want to use things like filters, you would put filter here. If you want to know more about filters, those are great things where you can do complex gets from your Firebase. I can make a video on that, but I feel like it's not too difficult after you get the basics down. Okay, and that's going to be Firebase admin / Firestore. Next, we want to initialize the app. So I'll say initialize app, and then I'll say credential : cert, quotation mark, and we are going to get our Firebase certification from our ENV, which I'll talk to you about when we get to that part. So for now, let's do process.env. And I'm going to call this my Firebase _creds. Whatever name you give your Firebase credentials, you should put it here. And finally, let's do const db equals get firestore. If your Firebase credentials are not correct, this will be the first issue that you see, and you won't be able to push your build to Heroku, but we'll talk about that as we get there. Now, next we have our get, post, update, patch, delete, whatever you want. So I'll say router dot, I'm just going to make two basic ones, router dot post, and let's do /call /doc, and this is going to be an async rec res equals greater than function. Now const call equals rec.params.call, const doc equals rec.params.doc. So pretty much to get this, we do /API / whatever collection name we want / whatever document name we want. We'll talk about that when we get into the client. And you can add as many of these /: words as you want and get as many of them as you want. Now, because this is a post, we should also have data in our body. So I'm going to say const data equals rec.body. Then I want to do a try catch. So try catch, I'm just going to say E for my error, and I'm going to console.log E, and then I'm going to say res.status of 500, which is a server error. You can be more precise with your errors if you want. And then in the try, I'm going to say await db.collection@call.doc.set data. And if we haven't thrown an error, then we get to res.status@200.send, and we don't want to send anything because we are posting and not getting. And so pretty much what this is we go to our collection at the name call that we send here. We go to our doc at the name doc, which we set here, and we set the data that we put in our request body, which we will get to when we get to our client. And with that, we would add data, we would set it in our Firebase. We can also use things like update and delete. Delete might be better in a get or a more specifically delete. But we don't need to go too detailed here as long as you have the basics. Route.get, easy enough to Google from here. So route.get /:call, maybe we want a whole collection. This would be async rec res, just because the collection and the document getting is a bit different. I will show you all of that here. So another const call equals rec.params.call. That's the great thing about these /: name, like the field parameters, I believe, or the request parameters. You know, you can add them in just about anything here. Then we say try catch. Let's do another E. And then I'm just going to 500 and send while logging my error. So in here, I'm going to say const call data equals await db dot collection at call dot get. This will get your entire collection, which can be quite big. When you're getting an entire collection, it's great to use the filter. You can Google that fairly easily. Firebase has an okay document for that. And now that we've got this collection data, I'm going to say res.status of 200.send, and I'm going to say call data.docs.map doc equals greater than, and I'm going to say doc.data function. And pretty much what this does is it gets the entire collection from the route collection, and then it will get the documents in that collection. It will map through every document and return the document data. So it pretty much converts that from a doc snap to like a dictionary, I believe, or a dictionary. And that's for getting entire collections. Maybe we want just one document instead. So route.get /call/doc async rec res equals greater than function const call equals rec.params.call const doc equals rec.params.doc. Then another try catch. You know what? I'm just going to copy and paste this one because it's fairly similar. Except instead of call data, this is going to be our doc. Actually, I think it's more like a doc snap instead of doc data. You know what? Let me just fix the call. It's going to be a collection snapshot, not a collection data. Not really necessary there. It doesn't really matter what you name it. But yeah, anyways. So the doc snap is going to await db.collection.call.doc at the name of our doc. Now, instead of getting an entire collection, this gets a single document, which means all we need to do is we need to send docsnap.data. And a final thing that I'll add for you, I'm just going to copy this whole thing because it's going to be fairly similar. I'm going to say route.delete, router.delete. We'll get the collection and the doc name, collection doc. And this time we don't need to get anything. We don't need to send any data. We just get collection doc and then we call delete. This will delete the document at the collection in our Firebase. If this has any issues with it, it's going to go here and send a server error. Otherwise, it's just going to send that it successfully deleted. Now, at the end of everything, we want to type module.exports equals router, and that will export our router to our server. One final thing before we go on to our React app is I want to say touch.getIgnore, and that will create a getIgnore file. The getIgnore needs to be at the root base. This is going to be everything that we want to ignore when we push to Firebase. So these are going to be things that we don't want everyone to be able to see. Now, the first thing we want is we want our node modules. You never push the node modules to GitHub or to Heroku just because they are so huge and quick to install on the user's page. So we want node modules and we want .env. We don't want to push any of those, even though we're going to be using our environment variables from Heroku instead of here. But okay, now that that's done, we want to create a React app. Make sure you have your create React app here. If you don't, make sure to type npm I create React app. Don't do it again if you've already done it, but now we want to use it. Now there are a few commands that you can do to actually create a React app. Usually you can just type create-react-app and then the name of the file. And that's how I can do it on my laptop, but I'm on my desktop computer where I need to type npx create React app client. So try both of those. If you use it and it doesn't work, it would just say that the create React app function is not a known function or something like that. And if that happens, just try to use npx. Google it. Sometimes people use curl or brew or other commands other than npx, depending on the type of node that you have installed on your computer, I believe. So yeah, just see what command works for you. I need to use npm and npx for my commands, and yours may be different. Now we see that my React app client is almost done building. We'll go through and delete some things and clean some stuff up. But from now on, everything that we do should be in our client folder, which means here we're at my FERN demo. So I want to do cd and then client. cd again is change directory or move to another folder, and we see that I'm now in my folder. We also see that it says master. That is because we want to go reveal in our file explorer on the client. That is because React comes with a Git added to it. And we do not want that. That will prevent our entire client from pushing to GitHub, crash our entire Heroku app, cause all sorts of issues. So just go in here and delete the Git there. After you delete the Git, then you can close it. Let's open up our src in our public because we're going to go through and delete a bunch of things. Select README, Setup Test, Report Web Vitals, Logo, Index CSS, App Text JS, App CSS, Logo, favicon, icon, and delete all of those. It's just going to take a moment to remove all of it. Next, we want to go into our index HTML and clean this up. One thing with your link icon for your index HTML, and again, index HTML is this index HTML here that is going to send to the user. React will give you a warning if you do not have a link rel icon, and we cannot have one because we have the favicon icon here. So I'm just going to grab a random icon from icons 8. You can even grab yours from your Cloudinary or wherever you're hosting your images and put it there. But just know that if you don't have a link rel icon, you will see a warning in your Heroku logs tell, but doesn't crash your app. So here I am in icons 8. I'm just taking this fun little React icon right here. Feel free to grab whatever you want or nothing if you don't want. And I'm just going to paste it here, linking there. Next, we want to get rid of all of these links. Don't remove the title. Actually, you know what? We can keep the manifest since we have the manifest JSON still. You can remove all of the comments if you don't want those. And that should be it for the index HTML. Let's go into the manifest JSON. We don't have any of these icons, so you will see an error or maybe a warning when you push to Heroku there. Let's go into our index.js. We want to remove the index CSS, report web vitals at the bottom. We don't want any of that stuff. We'll go into our app. I'm going to remove that. I'm going to even take the export default here and put it before my function, just because I like to keep it concise, I'm going to delete the entire header of my app, and I'm going to save that. Now let's add some things to our package JSON. We do have a few other things that we need to change in here as well. So I'm going to go back down to my bash terminal and make sure you're in the client folder and not in the main folder. And I'm going to do npm I, just like when we're adding things to Node. I want to install axios.env again, Firebase, not Firebase admin, remember that, and React Router DOM, just so we can have multiple pages. And I'm going to press enter. That should take one moment and install. Firebase has a built-in function called fetch, which is just about the same as Axios, but I have more luck getting Axios get, push, delete working than I do with fetch, so I use Axios instead of the default fetch. .env again, so we can use environment variables in our React app. Firebase will let us authenticate in Firebase. We're going to do authentication and Firestore database in this demo. And React Router DOM, like I said, just so we can have multiple pages. And we do have one last thing that we want to change here, which will be adding a proxy server, which kind of just helps our Axios function properly. And we see that the build here is the React scripts build, and this is kind of what's run from the server JS, and just something that we kind of need. Okay, now everything has been added. Let's go below the private, and I'm going to type proxy : and then http 2 t's, sorry, not 3 t's, / local host : 3001. Now, if you changed your server from 3001, you would want to make sure you change that here as well. And if you have any issues, just go back to 3001 instead of setting a different port. But okay, make sure that's saved, and we can go into our app where I'm going to be setting up some routes. I don't think I'll do too much here just because I want to stay true to what we have, but I'll at least have a login route, a home route, and a CRUD route. CRUD stands for create, read, update, and delete, the different things you do with a REST API. So let's do import, curly brackets, browser router as router, routes, and route. Make sure routes is capitalized, and this is going to be from, and we want to import this from React Router DOM. Now here I'm just going to finish deleting the rest of this stuff, and I'm going to type router. Inside of router we need to have routes, and then inside of the routes is where you have each of your routes. So you say the path that you want it to be. I want this to be the path to nothing, and then element equals curly brackets. We'll have an error for now, but we'll fix it later. Control C, paste, paste. I'm going to have 3 routes. I'm going to have my login route, and I'm going to have my CRUD route. You can give it much better names if you like, but we'll go with the errors for now. I'm going to right click on src, go to new folder. I want to create a folder called paths. Inside my paths, I'm going to make a new file. This will be my home path.js. Let's do export default function home path return div. You can make it much better than mine. I'm just going to give this an H1 where I say home. It's going to have 2 buttons. I'm going to call this a div class name, button, on click. We'll add the on click later, and this is going to be log in / log out. You know what? I'm just going to put them both on the same page. And then div class name, button, on click, and this will be CRUD commands. Okay, at the very top here, I want to get my use navigate from React Router DOM. So I'm going to say const navigate equals use navigate, and we see that it adds the use navigate from React Router DOM at the top. Make sure you add parentheses there. Now on click, I want to say for log in, I'm going to say navigate to / and this is going to be my login path. The next one is going to be CRUD. So log in. Now here it's going to be navigate to / CRUD. So this one will navigate to my login page. This one navigates to my CRUD page. I'm going to save that, and the home page is done. Let's do the login page. So new file, this is going to be my login path.js. Let me just copy that right now. And let's do export default function login path. Give these whatever names you want. Create other pages if you want to. And this is going to return another div. Let me also get my navigate right now. So const navigate equals use navigate. Make sure you have the import there too. This is going to have the h1 of login / logout. We'll add a provider context later to get user. So for now, let's just get some default stuff. Let's have another div class name, button, on click. And then I'm going to copy this and I'm going to paste 3 of them, because this is going to be log in. This is going to be log out. And this is going to be back to home. Now here is going to be a function which is going to say navigate to the home path when we click back to home. And we can't set up these buttons yet because we don't have our provider, but let's finish with our paths first. So our next one is going to be new file. This is going to be CRUD path, copy that, .js. Now export default function CRUD path. I hope that yours is much better than mine because this is just for a demo. So div h1 CRUD commands. We will have div class name, button, on click. We'll even create a context for our CRUD commands, so we don't need to hand make them. So we want to do create, read, and delete. In Firebase, set and update are fairly similar. You have to be a bit careful with the update though, because that will throw an error if the data does not exist yet, but it still has its uses. Let's get our navigate again. So const navigate equals use navigate. You can even make a context for navigation so you don't have to do it every single page. But for this, I'm just going to do it here. So navigate, and this is going to be /. It's going to say back to home. I believe that's what I typed in my login. Yes, it is. Okay, good. Now this is going to be create data. This is going to be read collection, read document, and this is going to be delete document. You know what, because I'm using lower cases here, let me just use lowercase on my data here. Actually, this would be create document, I should call that. Okay. And now we need to add some functionality for our login and our CRUD. So I'm going to go back to my src new folder. I'm going to call this my contexts. I'm going to right click here, go new file, and I want my auth context.js. I'm going to right click again, new file, and I want this to be my CRUD context.js. Now the auth context is a bit easier. This is where we are going to log the user into Firebase and log the user out of Firebase. I'll show you how to do it with Google. That's kind of the most difficult one. After that, you can add the email and all of that stuff too. But before we get too far into our auth and CRUD, let's actually go and set up our Firebase. So I'm in my Firebase, add a create project. I'm just going to call this my FERN demo. If you need to change the name, it will tell you here. Don't need Google Analytics. You can leave it on if you want, and it will take a moment to prepare your project. So let's come back when that's done. All right, and my project is done. Let me go continue. It's going to open up my project now. And we want to get started with a web version. I'm just going to give it a nickname, give it whatever nickname you want to call it. I'm going to call this FERN Demo again. I'm going to register the app. You should do this with every website you want to connect it to, every Unity account you want to connect it to as well. We will use this in our React, I believe, which we'll come back to later. So we'll just do continue to console. I'm going to build, I want a Firestore database, and I want to build an authentication. With the Firestore database, let's go in here. We want to create database, use it with whatever location is closest to where your database is. Okay, looks like I had some trouble setting my location, but oh well. Now I'm going to start in test mode, which means that the database will run until the 7th of whatever the 8th month is. So I'll click create. It's going to take a moment and work on creating the database, and then we'll go into authentication right away and work on that. All right, my database is done. You can change your rules here. The rules can be a bit complicated, but pretty much you say what you want to allow users to read and write. You can make sure they're authenticated before they can read and write, but we're doing this off of our database and not from our React, where we have authentication. So we can talk more about that if you're interested in that. But let's get started on our authentication. You can do email, phone, anonymous, all this stuff. I'm just going to go with Google. I'm going to click enable, and then I'll have to set my email, so I'll do that off screen. All right, and now my Google's added. If you want to add any other sign-in options, you go here. They've got a fairly okay document section that you can look through for how to set these up on your own. But I'm just going to go through the Google and the Firestore database. Google is one of the more complex ones, but with that, we are all set up. We're not actually going to be coming back to this until after we push to Heroku. But yeah, let's go into our auth context and set that up now. Now, in the auth context, I want to add some imports. So I want to import initialize app from Firebase /app. It's got the wrong import. So let's fix that. It's not Firebase admin, that's for our node. It's going to be Firebase/app for initialize app, and then we want to import Google Auth Provider get auth and sign in with pop up and on auth state changed. If you have any spelling errors there, you'll see the issues when you push to Heroku. And this is going to be from Firebase /auth. Okay, the other things should import on their own. So let's make our context. So I'm going to say const auth context equals use context. Make sure you get that import from React. Sorry, not use context. This is going to be create context. We don't want use context here unless you add like a notification provider. Okay, and you can leave this blank or you can fill it out. It doesn't matter, but I like to fill it out. So I'm going to make sure I have a user variable, a user error variable. I'm going to have a sign in with Google, which is going to be a function. And I'm going to have a sign out, which is going to be a function. And below that, let's create our provider. Every time you have a context, you want a provider, I believe. So we have auth provider equals, let's have children. Make sure you don't grab the React children. Those are grungy and nasty. And let's add our variables. We're going to have some use state variables. So const app set app equals use state. Make sure you get that imported from React. We can see that up here. Next, I want const auth set auth equals use state. If you don't know about use state, you pretty much have the variable and then the update variable there. They're very powerful things in React. Next, we have our things here. So we have const user set user equals use state. Const user error set user error equals use state. And then let's initialize Firebase Firestore. So I'm going to put this in a use effect. Make sure you get that from React. Use effect is a thing that's going to run whenever the things in your dependency list changes. So I'm going to put this on app. It will also run once when the app starts. In testing mode, it will run twice. So if we do not have an app yet, if app is null, then I want to say set app to my initialize app, and this is going to get my process.env.firebase. Let's do Firestore creds. So down in our routes, we are using the Firebase creds. Make sure you don't use the same name because this is going to be for our auth. We can even add a comment there. So this is for auth. And then in our auth context, this is going to be for our Firestore database. So we set the app there. It's very nice to get this whole thing. Actually, I believe we want to do one more thing. Let's cut that out. Let's do JSON.parse. Yeah, we want to parse this into JSON because it's going to be a string when we run it. And then let's do another use effect. This one is going to be for initialize authentication. We're going to do another use effect. This use effect is going to be ran with the dependency array of app and auth. And we say if app and not auth. So if we have our app initialized and we do not have our auth initialized, then we want to run this. Because if you try to authenticate your Firebase when you have not initialized the Firebase app, you will have some issues. So I'm going to say const authentication equals get auth of our app. That's why we have to have app initialized. Next, I want to say authentication dot use device language. You don't need to put that in, but I like to. Next, I will say set auth to our authentication. And we want to use authentication one more time, which is why we can't just set auth get auth. Yeah. And I'm going to say on auth state changed, which means anytime the user has changed, it's going to get user. Now this can return a null user, so we want to say set user of our user, set user error to null, and then we can even say if user, if we have a user, then we can console.log logged in as, I'm sorry, I want to use backticks for this. Logged in? No. Logged in as, I'm going to say user.displayname. Now you can only get the display name from like Google and Microsoft. You don't get it from anonymous or email. So make sure you know which user you are getting and maybe even set the stuff there. Okay, now we're going to go after the user function and we're going to get error. So this is if there has been any errors getting the user. I'm going to say set user error to the error dot message, and we can even say console dot log backtick user error dot message, just to kind of give us a log. You might want to remove that during production. And there we have it. Now we've got our user and our user error set up. So let's set up our sign in with Google and sign out. So const sign in with Google equals the empty function of const provider equals new Google Auth provider. Then I want to say provider dot set custom parameters is going to be a function with an object where we say prompt is select underscore account. And then finally sign in with pop-up with our auth and our provider. You can set a thing in here where if we do not have auth yet, so we say something like if not auth, return, and we can even console.log, or in your notify provider, we say authentication has not been set yet. And this just kind of keeps you from getting an error. The sign in with pop-up does occasionally give you an error in React just because it doesn't like how it's opening pages and pop-ups and things like that. But you get the same thing from redirect, and this seems to all come from Google, and I haven't found a way to remove that from the React side. So next, let's do const sign out, which is going to be equal to the empty function, where we just say auth dot sign out, and then we can say dot then, or we can await it if we want. So then we are going to run the function where we just say console.log signed out. And finally, let's do return, well, not finally, but almost finally, we'll say auth context dot provider with the value, and we want to have everything that we put up here. So user error, sign in with Google, and sign out. So user error, sign in with Google, and sign out. And then let's put that there, and let's put our children in the middle, the children that we grabbed. And at the bottom, let's export our auth context and our auth provider. So this lets us use our login in anything that is inside of our auth provider. So if we go to our index, I can do auth provider. Make sure you get that import there. Now we'll just put my app inside of this. So anything I have in my app can use my auth provider. And with that, the auth provider or the auth context is done. Let's go with our CRUD context next, which will let us get all of our stuff from our node server. So the first thing we want to add to our CRUD context is we want Axios, because we're using Axios and not Fetch. I just find Axios works more reliably than Fetch for me. Next, we also want to get our auth context so we can make sure that the user is actually signed in before they add anything to the database. We also want to get some other things which should add automatically. So let's do const CRUD context equals create context. Make sure that's imported from React. And inside my CRUD contexts, I want to have data. I want to have error. I want to have is loading. I want to have set doc, which is going to be a function. I want to have get doc, which is also going to be a function. I want to have get call or collection, which is also going to be a function. Oh, make sure you add that greater than. And I'm going to have del doc, in case you're still running on a Dell PC. I mean, if you want to delete a document. So next we say const crud provider equals, again, we want to grab the children of everything that we put in this. Don't grab those nasty, grungy React children. And then in here, let's define our use states. So const data set data equals use state, and this is going to be an empty array by default. Let me just copy this because error and is loading are going to be the same. So this is going to be error, and this is going to be is loading. Then instead of set data, this is going to be set error. Instead of set data, set is loading. And I also want to get the user. So const curly brackets user equals use contexts, and this will use the context of our auth context. So this is the first time we're actually using our contexts that we created. So our first one we want is const set doc, which is going to be equal to an asynchronous function, which will get a call and a doc. And we also need the data to set as well. And then let's have this be a function. And inside of our set document, we say if not user, if we do not have a user logged in, then I'm just going to say console.log log in to set doc, and then I'm just going to return from this function so we don't actually set the doc after telling them that they can't. So next, let's get the endpoint that we want to send this to. So let's get const endpoint equals, and I'm just going to parse this ahead of time. So backtick is going to be curly brackets of call slash forward slash curly brackets doc, and that's the link that we are sending it to. And you know what, let me even add, yeah, we don't want to add API yet. Then let's set the data for this since we are using it right away. So set data. When we set the data, we want to get the previous data, and we want to say ... prev, which kind of grabs that previous data. We want to set it at the endpoint, and we want to say that the data here is equal to the data that we are setting in our database. Then let's do a try catch. So try catch E for the error. And if we have an error, let's just do this now. It's going to be console.log our e.message. Then I want to set the error to, just like with our set data, it's going to be prev, get the previous stuff, spread the previous stuff across our data so we don't overwrite it. Then at endpoint is going to be our e.message. Now in the try, where we try to do some stuff, let's get const response, or res as I'm calling it, equals await. This is why we must have setDoc as async, because we are awaiting something to happen. I'm going to say axios.post, and this is going to go to /API / curly brackets endpoint, and then we want to add the data that we want to send. Then I'm going to say if res.status is equal to 200. Make sure you have 3 equal signs. Then I'm going to say console.log set data, else console.log error setting data. And with that, our set doc should be done. So pretty much what this says is we make sure that the user is logged in first. Then we get the collection and document, and we post to /API at the collection document, and we send the data. So the API or the server gets everything that goes to /API and sends it to router. If you want to use a different router, you do slash, whatever name you want there, and it would send it to your index router. Now we are doing a post. Yes, we are posting, which means in our routes index.js, it goes to post call doc. It removes the API, so we get the call in the doc from there, and we get the data from the body, and then we set it, and then we say that it's okay. And that's exactly what we do here. Now I'm going to minimize setDoc, and after setDoc we want const getDoc, which is going to be equal to an async, and to get doc we need another call and we need a doc. We don't need any data because we are getting it. We can even make a const get call, which is another async. This time we just want the collection name, and const del doc, which is another async, and this time we want a call and a doc, so we can delete it. So at this point you can pause it if you want to try and do it. We're going to be doing the same things where we do Axios get, Axios get, Axios delete. If you haven't paused it, or if you did, let's follow along and finish this up. So the first thing I want to do is I actually want to copy my user check. So I pretty much want the user to be logged in to do anything with the Firebase. Now, if they are logged in when I am trying to fetch a document, then I'm going to say const get my endpoint again, which is just going to be the same thing as last time. It's going to be the call / doc. I'm going to say set is loading. Grab the previous. As always, we're going to spread previous over as it's called. I believe it's called spreading. And then we are going to say that the endpoint is true. Let's copy this, but instead of set is loading, we are going to set the error, because there is no longer an error, so the error is going to be null here. Now after we tell the user that it's loading, well, our application that it's loading and we don't have an error, let's go into our try, catch e, and we'll even add a finally. Finally is ran at the end of the try catch, where we are just going to run, or set is loading, and this time it is no longer loading because we are finally out of the try catch. We either have data or we have an error at this point. So in the try, we're going to say const res equals await axios.get, because getDoc is a get function, not a post or a delete, And as always, we want the slash API slash, sorry, I want backticks for this again. So I can use the curly bracket, $ curly bracket at our endpoint. So this would go into our slash API slash call slash doc instead of just the slash call. Then I'm going to say if res.status is equal to 200, then I want to say const data equals await res.data. So we need to await that res data. This is another reason why Axios is nice, because we get data and we don't need to run a JSON function like we do with fetch. And then we say set data, which is going to be the same as everything else. So previous function dot 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 prev, spread the previous. We're going to go to the endpoint and we're going to set the data to the data that we just awaited. Now, if we did not have a successful res, we don't know what the error is at this point unless we send it in our send, which I'm not going to do. I'm just going to say console.log error getting data. We can even say from where, so it's at least a little bit more specific. So from endpoint. In the catch, we are just going to console.log our e.message, and we are going to set the error not to null but to e.message. And with that, we have got the doc. Now, get the collection is going to be a little bit different because we're getting a bunch of docs at once. So let's get into that. So let me actually just copy most of this because it's going to be fairly similar. Now, instead of endpoint is just going to be call. So let me replace my endpoints here. And so we say that the collection is loading, the collection does not have an error, we await the Axios get at our slash API slash collection. If we did, then we got it. And we set the data. Otherwise, we say it's an error. And yeah, that's it. So we can actually connect call and get doc. We would just change it from call to endpoint, which might even be better, but I've already done it, so oh well. Now let's move on to our delete, which is again very similar but slightly different. So I'm going to Windows V to get my, there we go. Let me remove that extra space. And yes, this time we do have our endpoint again. Looks like I lost my endpoint when I copied, so let's copy that. Add my endpoint here. And instead of axios.get, this is axios.delete. So even though we're using the same endpoint, I'm using axios delete, which runs to any delete calls I have here. So that's another good thing between post, get, and delete. Even though it's running to the same API, it's using different Axios commands. So this one would Axios delete at the endpoint. We don't actually need to, we still want to await the response so we see that the status is okay, but we don't want to await any data. We would just console.log log deleted, actually let me do backticks, always forget that, deleted data at endpoint error deleting data from. Everything else is good with our delete, and then we want to end our context off like we ended our previous context off. So return CRUD context dot provider value is equal to the double curly brackets. As always, we are going to return our data error is loading, our set doc get call get doc and del doc. And then we go here, we put our children inside of this. We go to the very bottom and we say export CRUD context, CRUD provider. We save that, and just like we did before, let's go to our index. We want to put it inside of our auth provider because our CRUD provider uses our auth provider. And our app will use both our auth and our CRUD, so that needs to be inside of that. And that's pretty much how it works. If you have like administrator, an administrator provider, you only put your administrator pages or routes inside of your administrator provider. You don't want to wrap anything else in that provider. But okay, now that's done. We should have all of the paths here too. So let's go into our app.js. Let's get our home path. We might need to add the import for home path. Our login would be our login path. We probably aren't seeing this because we have errors in it, but that's fine. And then our CRUD path. And yes, we are seeing errors. So I'm going to import these. So import home path from dot slash. Okay, still not letting us do it because we have errors, so that's too bad. I'm going to say paths slash. Let me just actually copy this 3 times so I can copy and paste. So home path, login path, CRUD path. And when you don't have errors, I do recommend playing around with this. And it just looks like we'll have these errors until we finish our login path and our CRUD path. So let's go through and finish these first. So just like we did in our CRUD context, we want to add our auth to our login path. So we'll say const, let's do user. We want, what else do we want from our auth context? We want our sign in with Google and our sign out. So sign in with Google and our sign out equals use context. Make sure you get that import, and it's going to get from our auth context. Make sure you get the proper import for the auth context. Now when we do log in, this is going to be calling our sign in with Google. We don't actually need to put a function there, and then sign out. Now I want to do one more thing. So we only see the login when there's no user, and we only see the log out when there isn't a user. So user question mark colon, tab that over so it looks nice. Now I'm going to cut my login. So if we don't have a user, we can log in. If we do have a user, we can log out. And there we go. Now our login path is complete. Let's do our CRUD path. So our CRUD path is going to get our 4 functions from our CRUD. We can even get our data and display that. You know what, let's even have a input, and the input is going to be of the type text. Let's have some use state values. So const call set call equals use state. Make sure you remove the use search params, otherwise you get warnings when you build this. If you did make the mistake that I did, that's going to be an empty string. Then const doc set doc equals use state of an empty string, and let's even get a data. So const data set data equals use state, and this will just be some JSON data. So input type text value is going to be the call on change is going to take e, and then it's going to say set call of e dot target dot value. Let's copy that 3 times because this is going to be our doc and set doc. And actually, no, we don't want an input here. We want a text area. So we have a multi-line thing. I don't think we need the text here. This is going to be data and set data. We can even set the number of rows and columns. So I'm going to say the rows is, I don't know, 5, and the calls, I don't know, like 50, whatever we want to put it to. And then we can use this data when we want to do our for commands. I'm just making it very ugly and quick. So the next thing we want is we want to get the stuff from our CRUD context. I'm just going to drag that over so I can see it easier. Don't want the auth context. There we go. CRUD paths. So I'm going to say const, and let me just get these 4 functions, equals use context of our CRUD context. Now we have setDoc here, setDoc here, so let's change the name of this setDoc. Let me just name this doc name, setDoc name, which means I also need to change setDoc name and doc name there, just because we don't want 2 things named the same. Okay. Now, if we click the Create Document button, this is going to run the function of setDoc, which setDoc will take call doc, and let's do json.parse our data. Then for reading a collection, it's going to be get call, and it just takes the call. Read a doc is going to be get doc of our doc and our call. Sorry, not doc, but doc name is what we call it now. And yes, we need to set doc name here as well. Make sure you don't make the mistakes that I made. Okay, and delete document is going to run the function of del doc at call and doc name. And just like that, all of these functions should work. If we go back to our app and we save it, let's see if we have the issue fixed. Still giving us an odd error. Let me look into this. Okay, so the fix to that error was just closing it and opening it up again. Sometimes the ESLint is just a bit finicky. With that, we are almost complete, but we did add a lot of these class name buttons. So let's just go into our src. Let's do a new file. I'm going to call this index.css. In my index.css, I'm going to say dot button because it's a class. If it was an ID, I would do pound button. And the button, I want to have it have a border of 1 pixel, solid, black, border, sorry, I need to put a, there we go, border radius, I want it to have 1 rem. I want to have it as a background color of antique white. Sure, that works. Let's do a padding of 1 rem. Let's have it have a margin auto width fit content. Anything else I want for my button? Yes, I want my cursor to be a pointer. Let's even do a font weight of 600, font size of 1.5 rem, and there we go. Now let's go into our index and let's import this. So I'm going to say import dot slash index dot css. Okay, and with that, everything should be functional once we add our environment variables. But to do that, let's publish everything to Heroku. So now we're at the point where we want to publish to Heroku. So good job making it this far. It's been quite a while. Now, before we go to Heroku, you do need the Heroku command line interface, and you do need to log into Heroku. So I am excited to be this far. Let's go back to our terminal, which we've ignored for quite a while. We're at the FERN demo client. I want to be at my main folder, so I'm going to do cd ... change directory, move back one. Now I'm at the FERN demo, and now I want to say git init. This will initialize an empty git repository and add everything here. Make sure that you do have the git ignore for node modules in env, and still have the React git ignore, which will tell it to ignore this stuff in React as well. Now, after we do git init, I want to do Heroku create, and then type the name of the app that you want. If you don't have the Heroku command line interface installed, you will see errors here. Just to go over it with you in case you're bad at using the search engines, at devcenterheroku.com articles Heroku CLI, it walks you through how to install it. They've got an installer for Windows, makes it very easy. So you just install it or download it, then install it. You can also do some different things like npm i-g Heroku. After you're done, make sure you do Heroku -- version to check the version that you want. And we will want to be doing Heroku login later. So I'm going to call my Heroku create FERN demo. Make sure you have Heroku command line interface installed. And it's just going to take a moment, and it's going to create a FERN demo Heroku thing. Now, if I go to my Heroku dashboard, I can see my Heroku demo. We see that I have not pushed anything. I've just kind of added it. We do want to go into our settings right now so we can reveal some or add some configuration variables where we want to go throughout our app and add our configuration variables here. So let's look at the variables I want. Anytime I see a process env, the node env is going to be added by Heroku itself as well as the env port, so you don't need to worry about those. But in our index, we have the Firebase creds. These are very important, and I believe that's the only process env that we have in our node. So I'm going to paste the key Firebase creds, make sure it's exact, so it's best if you just copy and paste. And this is going to be for our Firebase Firestore database. So if I look back at my Firestore database, I want to go into my project settings. And for the Firebase creds, we actually want to go to service accounts. Now, I will be deleting this before I even publish the video or even edit it. So, please use your own. But we want to click generate private key and don't show them to anyone like I am now. So we just generate, download it, click the download file, open it up in whatever you want, Visual Studio Code, Notepad, Visual Studio, as long as you get it. We're going to copy the entire thing, close it down, go here where it says value, and just paste the whole thing in and click add. And this is the great thing about what we're doing is it's sending a string from our env and then we're parsing that into JSON so we don't need to actually lay out anything, which can be quite cumbersome. Now the next thing we want to go into our auth context, which is where we do our next process env, and I believe that is our last one. I'm fairly certain it is at least. So let's go back to our node. Let's add the key Firestore creds, and let's go back to our project. This one would be in general at the very bottom, and we're going to copy the Firebase config. It's a bit odd, but yeah, the Firestore creds, or Firebase creds as it's called, is for our Firestore, and then the Firestore creds as it's called is for our Firebase. So trust me on this, it's true. The names are a bit odd, but it works. Let's hope at least. Okay, but now after you've added those configuration variables, you should be free to go back down to your console. I'm going to do Heroku login just to avoid any issues with logging in. If you leave and come back to your project like an hour later, you'll probably have to log in again. Press any key, it will open up your last browser window and ask for you to log into Heroku. And there we go, I've logged in. I can go back here. It recognizes that I've logged in. Let's add a remote to this. So I'm going to say git remote-v. If you don't see this, if you see like it had an error pushing the remote, then there is a way for you to manually do it. Let me pull that up first. Again, Heroku Dev Center is much better than most dev centers. So if you were not able to use the git remote like it said, then you just type Heroku git :remote-a and then the name of the app that you added here. So I typed FERN demo, so I would type Heroku git :remote-a FERN demo. You would type whatever you typed here. And then you would get that remote added. Once we have that remote, you could manually add your configuration variables that we added in the website, but we did it already there. So then we do git add -A. This adds all of our stuff. Make sure it says client. If it doesn't add the client, that means you still have the git in the client. You need to delete that and do git add again. Then we do git commit -m initial commit. We see that everything is added, and then we do git push Heroku master, and this is where all of the problems come through. If I have any problems, that would be great because then I can walk you through them. If we don't see issues, I'll still talk to you about how things can work. So great. We have a thing. It said that the push was rejected. It failed to compile our Node.js app. That means we have some issue somewhere. So let's go and look into it. Now, Heroku is very finicky, but when it fails, don't panic. That happens. Just go to your activity, view build log, and you'll see some issues here. All right, so I did some searching and I found just a few small typing errors. So the first thing is in our Heroku post build, we actually want to say and npm install. Let's make sure we save that. Let's go over to our auth context where I actually have a spelling error in sign in with pop-up. That needs to be in lowercase I. We even need to go down here and make sure it's sign in with pop-up with a lowercase I as well. And I made the mistake where in your React app, all of your credentials must start with React_app_. So we're going to copy that, save everything. Then we'll go back to our Heroku dashboard. We're going to delete this Firestore creds. We're going to paste in the new key with React app. And then we want to paste our credentials in there. And you want to add quotation marks in front of all of the keys in this. Otherwise, you'll get an error with how you add it. So we'll click Add. Then we'll go down here. We'll do another git add-a, git commit, add a better message than initial commit like I did, git push Heroku master, and we'll let the Heroku build again. Now, as I was saying before, whenever you have something go wrong in your Heroku build, go into your activity and you can view the build logs there. One of the logs that I saw when I was debugging things was, let me go back to one of my bad builds. Here we go. Was like this one where it said the node version was not specified. And that's just because in my package JSON, I forgot to do the npm install, so it wasn't knowing how to run the build there. Another thing you can do from your git bash is you can type Heroku logs -- tell, and that can give you some good messages in the tell. It might take a while for my tell to load, but yeah, there we go. So it tells me what I've done, and it can even give you better errors than you would see in your activity. And now it says that it's done, it's successful, and even if it loads successfully, that might not be the end of it. So you do Heroku open. That will open your website in the last browser that you had open. And we see that mine is loading properly, but if yours isn't, you would do inspect, you would go to the console, and you can see some logs here. So before I had the logs that said that my Firestore creds was undefined, and that led me to remembering that I need to type React app in front of them. So everything is working. Let's go into login. I can click login. And of course I have the unauthorized domain there. So let's copy this, go to our Firestore, go to authorized domain, and you need to add your domain here. When you add another domain, you'll want to do that too. So let's just refresh, log in, and there we go. Now I've logged in as me. I can do log out, I can log in again, which opens it up, shows my email, and we can go back to home. We can go to the CRUD commands. If I go to the test collection and test01 data. If I go to read it, nothing's read, of course. But if I go to create document, let's say SATA 5, I don't know, I meant to type data. Just give that. Okay, so yeah, just my mistake with typing stuff. And I also just remembered that I forgot to actually log or do anything with that data, so you won't see that it's reading, but we don't have any errors, but it is reading. And I can even go in and delete the document. So if we go back to my Firestore database, we see that I should have the collection test, but I should not have the document test01. So let's just refresh that. Okay, let's create the document. It says that it's set the data. That means everything should be set properly. And there we go. Now we have the data there. If I change it to test02, okay, looks like it's having trouble actually parsing the JSON. But when you add stuff to it, it should be fine. If I go into delete document, it deletes it just fine, and it should read them perfectly well too. So there you have it. In just under 2 hours, we created a FERN app hosted on Firebase. Anyone can go to this link. Of course, I'll be shutting it down before I edit the video. But hopefully this has helped you. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.